Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Welcome to the Joe Cioffi Weather Show on this Thursday night, December 19th, 2019. Took a much-needed day off yesterday from live streaming. I'm still not quite 100% from my head cold. It's all right in here. I actually feel fine, but right in here, there's still a little bit of a weight. It's better than what it was, but I think I probably need another day or two. So we are in I think we're in a quiet period here, and let me just explain what I think is going on. So one of the things that I've noticed in terms of the pattern since the middle to latter part of October is that we seem to be here in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states anyway. We seem to be in these stretches that last about 2 weeks or so, or a little bit longer, where the weather gets really, really busy. We saw that the latter part of October into the first week or so of November. Then it got quiet for about 10 days or so, maybe a little longer than that. Then it picked up again around Thanksgiving week, and then going into the first week or so of December, 10 days of December. And now it seems that we're going into another quiet period. And I'm wondering if that is going to be the pattern for the winter going forward. Say, 2 to 3 weeks on and then a week to 10 days off. It would be maybe a little unusual, but sometimes you get into unusual patterns. A lot of times it just kind of locks into something and it just stays that way. We saw that last year. We see that in most winters. There's a certain rhyming theme that goes on. So maybe this year the rhyming theme is going to be, a couple of weeks and then a break, a couple of weeks and then a break. We'll see. But right now, we can say that at least as far as the weather in the eastern part of the United States is concerned, there are no major storms. Well, I better correct that. The Northeast, Mid-Atlantic states, and the northern portion of the South Atlantic states, okay? So no major storms really to deal with. Actually, the weather is going to be rather quiet. And in some cases, it may wind up being dry for the next 6 or 7 days, which will carry us right through Christmas. The action right now has shifted to the Pacific Northwest, where we're seeing some hefty snows being forecast in the mountains to the east of Seattle and Tacoma, and some very heavy rains for the lower elevations and coastal communities there of many inches. So while stuff is going on up in the Pacific Northwest, we seem to be in this quiet phase, and also a cold phase at the moment, because we had this is our coldest air mass of the month. We're at the very last days of autumn, first days of winter coming up soon. December, I consider a winter month. January, February, December, January, February, a winter month. So in certain ways, you could say it's the coldest weather of the winter so far. That's just how it looks. We had lows this morning. We're going to look at some of the high temperatures today, but we had lows down in the single digits and below zero in parts of New England. So let's take a look at what's going on. I want to touch on the long range tonight, because the pattern, even though it may be quiet, there are a few things happening in the upper air scenario across the northern hemisphere that I think are worth noting, and they might have some ramification down the road. We'll see. But I pulled up, I'm going to start tonight. This is WPC's, the Weather Prediction Center's probability of I actually clicked the button of 30 inches, okay? So it's not really often that you see the probability of 30-inch snows being indicated, but in fact, in the blue, where you see the blue shadings there, that's a 50% or higher probability of 30 inches or more of snow. And I was looking at some of the forecasts for the higher elevations to the east of Seattle and Tacoma, and Stampede Pass in particular struck me because of the fact that they're forecasting 2 feet of snow there, then a change over to rain for a couple of days, then a change over back to snow. I can't imagine what it's like living in those conditions, even though I imagine that up in Stampede Pass, the population's probably next to nil. That's that is, that's rough country up there. That's sheer elevation. I'm sure that in that particular area, they're forecasting probably for road travelers and whatever hikers that are around. Let me just very quickly say hello to everybody that's on tonight. Thanks for being here as always. I see Chuck Cardillo made it, and David Schwartz, Lisa Marie Nieves, Javon Perry, Johnny Quest is lurking about, Chris Alley, Mirtha Gunter, Tim is on board. Let's see who else. Oh, Elizabeth Harrison is on from upstate New York, and Frank Michael is here. Nice to see you, Philip Neary. And if I left anybody out, the chairman is not with us tonight. He had some family matters to contend with, and we wish him well with the holidays approaching. Everybody, let's not forget, by the way, just real quick, we all have issues to deal with, and this is a time of year where some people with the holidays have a tough time of it. So it's a little support is good. So if you can find it in your heart to, and I'm sure you can, all of you, to lend some support emotionally, whatever is needed to someone at this time of year, it's a good thing. And I always say one of the best things you can do is you do it silently. Okay, it doesn't need to be televised to all humanity, but just kind of putting it out there for you. But anyway, we've got our snow probability here pretty high for big snows out in the west. And when in terms of precip here over the next 5 days, the two main areas to watch for in terms of heavy precip, they're going to be the southeast, the Gulf states, the southeast part of the United States, and Florida. Some pretty hefty rainfall amounts of 2.5 to 5 inches being indicated. The northern edge of that precip makes it up to the North Carolina, Virginia state line roughly. And notice that a large chunk of the U.S. Through next Tuesday, Christmas Eve, is bone dry, and that includes virtually all of the Northeast, all of the Great Lakes, the northern Mid-Atlantic states, and back over to the northern, central, and a small portion even of the southern plains. The precip that you see down in Texas is front-end loaded. That's coming in for the system that's going to be crossing the Gulf this weekend. Meanwhile, in the Northwest, you're seeing all that precip coming into Northern California, all the way up northward along the coast of Washington state, and to a fair distance inland. And on the 7-day, I'll just go out 2 extra days, so that'll take us through next Thursday evening, so right past Christmas. We're seeing a little bit of light precip showing up in the plains, the central plains over to the Great Lakes. Some of that's going to be in the form of some snow, and that's really about it. Still very dry, although the area of dry weather does shrink a little bit when you add the 2 extra days on WPC's map. Now, here's a first. I don't know what that spot is. That's southwest of Tacoma on the Weather Service on the digitalweather.gov database for total snowfall over the next 4 days, taking us till Sunday evening. 165 inches. I think that's the largest print that I have ever seen on this particular on this particular map. 94 inches up northeast of Everett, Washington. 96 inches there as you get up closer to the Canadian border. I mean, those are really some crazy numbers. And we're also seeing some big numbers in parts of northern Idaho and northwestern Montana. So the focus of the snow is going to be more in the west now, particularly in the northwest. The heavy snow areas does extend into California, into the Sierra Nevadas to a certain extent, but the big amounts are up in the Cascades. And when we look in the east, by the way, the snow is minimal. Northern Maine, in and around the Great Lakes, and up in the northern lakes. So very little. We don't have, this is going to be a Christmas where actually for Christmas Eve and for Christmas Day. And I kind of prefer it this way because, if you've got to travel for Christmas and go for holidays, who wants to do it if they have to deal with snowstorms running around the country? This is actually, I think, a big positive. Everybody gets to get home, or perhaps you get to you have folks coming to you. Weather is going to be, in terms of travel, very little as far as rainfall. Snowfall is concerned. And the total rainfall is also going to be minimal, except, of course, if you're heading down into the Gulf states, which we're seeing through Sunday evening some 3-inch plus amounts, and you saw what the WPC did. But this should be gone by the time we get to later Monday and for Tuesday. So as far as high temperatures were concerned today, and please tell me it's not going to load. Something about this particular tool. And I guess because it's 12Z and 0Z, we're at 0Z now, so it's 7 p.m. I don't know whether there's some kind of data reset that goes on, but it just wipes all the data off. And I'm going to try to see if maybe I can get the min temperatures. Let's see. Every time I do this, nope. It is definitely, let's see what happens if I put historical. No, I can't even do that because that goes back to Tuesday. So I guess something happens around 0Z that causes this map to, oh, there we go. Now it's starting to populate, and now it's not. Hey guys, check this out. Fix this. Okay, we got numbers here. These were the highs today. Those the temperatures did not get into the low and mid 30s down in this area. I don't know if that's a 24-hour high. That's got to be. These have to be 24-hour highs. So this has to go back to last night where we're seeing these numbers in the lower 30s. So it didn't get out of the 20s today in this entire area. So you know what? Let's move along. Obviously, there's a data reset going on. Now, in the first frames of this loop, by the way, take a look at the area from central Missouri northeastward into northwest Ohio. That's all snow cover there, by the way, that you're seeing. When you go, the clouds start moving. Those clouds down there, what looks like cloud cover down there is not moving. That's all snow cover. And that was from the weather system that we were dealing with over the last couple of days. Meanwhile, you're seeing the storm coming in off the Pacific Northwest coast, shooting moisture up in that direction. And you're also beginning to see, by the way, moisture coming out in the subtropical jet across Baja California and Mexico into Texas. Now, this is going to be the storm that's going to be moving through the Gulf states, and some pretty hefty tropical moisture is setting up there for that. But for the time being, also bear in mind, there's very little happening here. You know, a little bit of cloud cover up in the northern plains, but that's it. It's mostly high clouds, and the skies in most of the east. There's a little bit of cloud cover going on in the northeast. You're seeing some clouds shooting across the Great Lakes southeastward, and that's producing a little bit of snow up around Lake Ontario. I think it was around Lake Erie when I last looked. My memory is failing, as you know. So here's the Pacific Northwest radar on the close-up view. Tons of moisture here. Solid coverage coming in from off the Pacific Ocean. Some very heavy rains happening in and around Washington and Tacoma. A little bit of shower activity down into parts of California, getting into some snows as you go east across Washington and into Idaho. And there was a larger patchy area of snow moving off Lake Ontario and Lake Erie into southwestern New York. That has since died off, and there's very little left with that. So what we're seeing, just some clouds that are streaming down to the southeast, and also getting a little bit of activity in South Florida, down around the Keys. But the rest of the country is very, very quiet. Let me bring up the warnings. Winter storm warnings up in the northwest, in Washington State and northern Idaho, northwest Montana. some advisories surrounding that. The green, those are all flood watches up and down the coast of Washington and Oregon. You've got high wind warnings up in some places, and you also have some winter weather advisories. I love the fact that they could put up winter weather advisories up for the Sierra Nevadas, and they're still forecasting up to 1 to 2 feet. So it shows you, I've seen them put winter weather advisories up for 2 to 3 feet of snow. So obviously their threshold of pain there is on the high side when it comes to total snowfalls. The surface map tonight, of course, all this storminess, low in the Gulf of Alaska, rather strong low there, 976 low. There's kind of a parent low there with a little bit of a baby low, a 96 low that's approaching Washington State with the trailing warm front into northwestern Oregon. That's pushing northward. And you do have some colder air lodged back out to the east in Washington and through Idaho. It's not especially cold, but it certainly is cold enough to produce some snow. And meanwhile, here in the east, the core of our cold high is down in North Carolina and Kentucky. We've got several high centers here being analyzed, and we have rather cool temperatures going all the way down into Georgia and Florida, where highs were only in the upper 50s and low 60s. And of course, we had a day today up in parts of northern New England where temperatures had a tough time just getting back into the single digits. Now, this cold air is going out, but the way the upper pattern is set up, it's kind of interesting because it's not one that screams big warm up coming. I mean, it does certainly suggest that we are going to see temperatures moderating and probably going a little bit above normal for a bit next week. But in terms of a crazy, big ridge in the east type record highs, no, that's not happening. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First off, this is our jet stream pattern that we have for tonight, and we still have something that has shown up many weeks ago. There is that bit of a split flow, and you've got these weather systems that are in the southern part of the jet stream. This one that's in northern Arizona, the upper low. Of course, we saw on the satellite loop all those clouds streaming in from the subtropical Pacific across Mexico and toward Texas. So it kind of makes sense with this jet stream pattern. You also have a negative North Atlantic oscillation in play right now. And in fact, when we look at those teleconnections, which we'll do a little later, you're going to see that the NAO actually stays negative for the next couple of weeks. So that is actually going to help to temper any rise in temperatures in the east. And the reason for that, it helps to temper it, is the way the NAO is measured is you have higher than normal pressures up in the North Atlantic. But you also have lower than normal pressures in this zone in the North Atlantic that is south of Greenland, down and north of the Azores. And you can see that there's an upper low sitting between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and there's another upper low that is out in the Atlantic between Iceland and the Azores. So that creates lower pressures there. And because of that, we're actually seeing a flow of air that is coming down from that region up near Greenland into Canada, into Labrador, and then that winds up dropping down, into the eastern part of the United States. This particular shot of cold air had its greatest impact in the Northeast and then down in the northern mid-Atlantic states. It really didn't have a huge impact back through, say, the Great Lakes or the Northern Plains. It didn't come from the regions in Western Canada. The reason why the cold air is a source is not from Western Canada is because we have this low in the Gulf of Alaska. And if you follow the northern part of the jet, you really don't have a very strong Canadian connection, as I've often called it. So that's how we're setting up with the weather, the upper air pattern for today. Now, watch what happens as we go through the next several days and through the weekend. Now, of course, this trough of the east pulls out, and you start to get the upper level winds going a little more westerly. Okay, they're not screaming westerly straight across the Pacific. There's a little bit of a Canadian influence here. It's not especially cold, but it's still enough. And of course, now you've got this southern stream system that is moving into East Texas. There would be a problem with this for us here in the eastern part of the United States if there were a strong enough shortwave in that northern stream to kind of come down and phase it with it. But it's not there. And as a result, that southern stream system, there were a few runs on and off days ago that were showing that southern stream system phasing a bit. But instead, you see how it stays separate. And now we're into Sunday night, Monday. And of course, there's nothing even really in the northern stream that's creating any sorts of issues. Now, going into Tuesday, you get a little bit of ridging here in the east. So I think if you want to talk about temperatures that have a shot of maybe going up into the 50s in some places, I think Tuesday is the day that can happen for Christmas Eve. But when we roll forward going into Christmas Day, I want to just point out something that's going on here in the overall pattern. In the North Atlantic, you have this sort of reestablishment of an upper low, a weak upper low, but it's strong enough that's sitting east of Newfoundland. And as a result, there's enough of a jet here in the northern stream into New England that it will keep the ridge in the east from flying all the way up. If it wasn't for this, if it wasn't for the fact that you had all these higher than normal pressures up in the North Atlantic, but more importantly that you have lower than normal pressures in the zone to the south of that, okay, between Iceland and the Azores and extending back over to eastern Canada. If it wasn't for that, you probably would fly the ridge all the way up the east coast, and we would be seeing temperatures up in and around record highs, and we would have that because you've got this trough, deep troughing off the west coast, and basically slightly wet, let's call it a west-southwest flow running from Baja California into the Carolinas. So it really tempers how much warming you'll be able to get out of this. And in fact, I would suggest that for say upstate New York and for central and northern New England, you're probably going to be, I from the standpoint of winter weather and certainly from the standpoint of the air mass we have right now, I wouldn't necessarily call it, cold, but it'll be a bit on the chilly side. If you live up there, you might think it's actually mild, but if you're watching it from the perspective of say somebody in the northern mid-Atlantic states and they see temperatures that are up in the 20s and low 30s, they might look at that and say, oh, that's cold, because it'll be cold for them. So going through the rest of next week, you're still maintaining, see that? You still maintain a bit of a jet there that comes out of Canada and into the Northeast, still have lower than normal pressures out in that band over the Atlantic and higher than normal pressures up from Scandinavia to Iceland to Greenland to Labrador. So that, again, keeps the warm-up tame. One thing we're not seeing, by the way, through all of this, is any kind of strong shortwave action that is moving along. I would kind of describe this whole jet stream that we're seeing here, this pattern that's evolving. I called it on my post today a messy jet stream, because it really is when you look at it. Oftentimes when you look at these, we've seen these upper air maps, you have one strong jet, and you've got a deep trough and deep troughs, lots of amplitude from north to south, strong ridges from south to north. In this case, you've got upper lows running around all over the place. You've got ridges, a ridge that's from Lake Superior up to Hudson Bay. You've got actually a stronger upper air winds going to the south from the southern lakes down to the Gulf states than you do going up to the north. So it's kind of a bit of a mess. And as we go through the long range, I think what we're going to see is gradually the pattern's going to evolve to a point where it will start to get busy again. And initially, it might mean that we'll have to see a storm go to the west up toward the Great Lakes, and that could happen toward the very end of the year, the last days of December. And I think after that, there's a fair chance that the pattern may wind up revert back to what we had, which was more troughing in the east and this split flow out in the west, where you're getting these weather systems dropping down into California and then moving along in the southern branch of the jet stream. One thing that seems to remain consistent through all of this is the tendency for higher than normal pressures up in the polar region. So that would favor, again, that concept of a negative NAO. So I think what we're seeing. I think the pattern going forward is going to be what we've seen since mid-October, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe let's say 2 weeks on, 1 week off, roughly. Okay, where you get storm chances for a 2 week plus period and shots of cold air, and then you get a week to 10 days where the pattern just kind of takes a deep breath. It doesn't get especially warm. On the other hand, the cold air is kind of cut off to a certain extent. You see temperatures moderate, and you go through a period of what I would describe as relative inactivity. So I think that's the best way to look at this. I also would just point out as well, because of the winter is over crowd is it's just hysterical. I don't know how you can follow weather with this idea that and you've heard me make this criticism before. I don't know how you can follow weather with the idea that somehow every single year you're entitled to above normal snowfall and below average temperatures. But not only that, but you want it where it's nonstop from November 1st to May 1st, and anything less than that is unacceptable. So I'm sure they're all jumping up and down over this 384 hour on the late afternoon run, which, by the way, is completely different from the 384 hour of the prior run, which is completely different from the 384 hour of the prior run, which is completely different from the 384 hour of the prior run. You get my point here, folks. The best way you look at these things is to look at, get the flavor of what the overall pattern is and go from there. And I think the trend is your friend. What we've seen, this sort of 2 weeks on, 1 week off kind of scenario, is probably what we would what we're going to have going forward, which suggests that when we get into the first when we get toward the very end of December, and particularly for those first couple of weeks of January, we'll probably go into another active period again. And don't expect it to show up on the actual models themselves on the runs, because it's not, the upper air might suggest it, but who cares what's on the surface? Much beyond after 7 or 8 days, it's like, who cares? Even in the latter portion of that, say the 4 to 7 day period, you have to have a lot of skepticism with regards to where these systems are. So looking ahead, as we take a look at the GFS, you've got another high that comes down into eastern Canada, which is why the temperature rebound, even though the first shot of cold air is moving out, we're getting a little bit of a reinforcement with this high going into New England on Friday and Friday night, and then it moves out, and a genuine moderation in temperatures begins going into Saturday and Sunday. And in the meantime, of course, you can watch low pressure developing in the central Gulf of Mexico, and it's producing an expanding area of heavy rain that goes into Florida. Some big rainfall amounts, tight low there. Well, they're probably going to have gales up for the coastal waters. Tight looking little low there that comes in on the Florida Panhandle and then redevelops off the Carolina coast. You see the northern shield there. Can't get north because there's no system in the northern stream to phase with it, or at the very least, if it was enough room where the system could climb up the east coast, but it really can't. And meanwhile, out in the west, the storm in the west, with its rain and snow in the northwest, gradually as we go through the weekend, you start to see another sort of baby system move into California with some rain and snows there and areas further to the south going into next week. But here we are, Christmas Eve morning, and a little bit of snow in parts of Utah, northern New Mexico, southern California, a little bit of rain in the mix too. The storm off the southeast coast continues to move to the east. Here in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, we actually have, if you take a look, there's a little bit of a frontal boundary that's running up here, another high across southern Canada, north of Lake Superior. So the air here is cold, but here is to the south of that frontal boundary, getting moderation and a bit of a warm up. So Christmas Eve itself around the country really looks relatively uneventful. Some snows in the central Rockies for Christmas Eve. Across most of the country, very little precip going on. We do have a little boundary here of a little frontal boundary here to the north into this low that's back through Kansas. I think, again, Tuesday might be the one day where we could see temperatures poke their noses up into the 50s in some places in southern areas of the Northeast and northern Mid-Atlantic states. And then you are seeing that high building into southeastern Canada. So a little colder air actually comes down. So a little bit of a backdoor front here for Wednesday night into Thursday, which makes sense. The system that's out in Kansas weakens because there's really no upper air support to hold it together. But you've got this high building down, so you may actually see some chillier temperatures here for Thursday and Friday of next week. And then we start to see weather systems, the traffic begins to move again in terms of activity. Watch the system that comes into California here on Christmas Day moves along, and that shoots a low out toward the Great Lakes going into the last weekend of December. Then the next one follows, and the GFS is cutting that up toward the Great Lakes. One of the things I'm noticing here, by the way, if you look at that low, and this is your negative NAO in play, so that's the thing that's most important to bear in mind. That low reaches peak intensity when it on this run. Now, we don't even know, this is going to be different on the next run, but the point is, if we're dealing with a negative NAO, you would expect that low to weaken as it moves northeastward through the lakes and attempt a redevelopment. And in fact, it does do that right here. It starts to translate eastward across the northern lakes into New England. If that negative NAO is a little stronger, perhaps you might wind up seeing that translation happening further to the south. So that's something I might want to pay attention to, given the negative North Atlantic oscillation readings that we're getting, that blockiness, as I call it. It's not a 50-50 type of block, but there is blockiness there to perhaps force tracks to be a little further south. And the GFS oftentimes likes to do this in the longer term, where it shoots things up too far north because it loves to do that. And in reality, it winds up being further south in cases where we have a negative NAO. But the point is that you're getting, all of a sudden now, as we head toward the last days of December and into those first 4 or 5 or 5 first 10 days, let's be fair, okay, give it a little room. The very last days of December and into January, and it looks like an active pattern starts to develop again. So I'm going to be curious to see what evolves in the models. And of course, on this run, it evolved into a snowstorm on January 4th. So who knows? I mean, it's kind of, I love seeing these things. I'd like to get somebody, the folks that deal with these models on a day-to-day basis, so they got to know, they got to know this. What the percentage of storms that appear on a certain time frame, and how often do those storms actually verify? I think that is that's something I could tell you that the number is probably up along the lines of 99% that they don't. But if you take that general takeaway, as I said, which is the fact that you've got that negative NAO at work, and this sort of 2 weeks on, 1 week off type of a pattern. The time frame for things to get busier at the end of the month and going into the first days of January would make sense. Now, here are your teleconnection indices, and your PNA is negative. It's not strongly negative. I would describe it as somewhat negative. It goes toward the neutral line around the 29th and then starts to go slightly positive. The NAO is somewhat negative, pretty much all the way through the forecast period. And the EPO is somewhat positive, although it trends back to the neutral line by the time we get to the end of the month and the very beginning of January. The funny thing is, depending on, there have been a number of runs lately where the models have been kind of flipping back and forth and having a battle between the European and the GFS, and we're seeing the models just kind of trying to decide where we're going to go going into the beginning of January. And on some runs, I've seen the European on some runs at the end of its forecast period look really cold. Then another run comes in and it goes the opposite way. The GFS has been doing the same thing, and the funny thing is that the European and the GFS have not been doing it together. It seems like on the odd runs that the Europeans got a cold outlook in the longer term, the GFS has a warmer one, and the reverse then is true on later runs. So I think what we're seeing is just a general instability in what is out there going on in the Northern Hemisphere, that sort of messy jet stream I described, all these weather systems running around, each one attempting to have an impact. So every model run is doing something somewhat differently. And anytime there's a negative NAO, I've noticed over the years, anytime there's a negative NAO for whatever reason, the models seem to be even more erratic than they usually are. So it gives us something to look at. Certainly gives us a lot to watch here going forward. So we're certainly not going to be sitting around twiddling our thumbs over the next couple of weeks. We're just getting that relaxation period. That's really that's all I think it really is. So let's get a blizzard for 2020, says Jason Schaefer. That's some EPO flip. Yeah, see, that's the thing, Jason. You take these teleconnections, which, as I have said many times, to try to remember, they're not really predictive. They're snapshots of that particular model run. So if we were to, this teleconnection shot was based on the 0Z run from last night. So you would get a totally different look in the latter part of the forecast period. You would get a totally different look if you did it now on the current run or on the run before that. So, I mean, they're useful in the sense that they at least give us, kind of a general. If you wanted to look at a quick snapshot picture and you have your idea in mind of what you would look for in teleconnections in order to bring colder weather versus normal or milder weather versus normal, I think that's where they're useful. Also, when you see these spikes up, like you do on the PNA, for example, which goes from strongly negative to the neutral line, oftentimes when these teleconnections go to that neutral zone, from a negative value or from a positive value to a neutral zone, they're telling you that there's that means big pressure change in the area that the index covers. So then you got to go in and look and see, well, where are these big pressure changes happening? Because these show changes over a very large geographic area. And just because you have your teleconnections where you think you want them, they don't necessarily mean that the outcome is predetermined because of what the teleconnection shows. You could have all the teleconnections pointing where you'd like them to be for a snow event, but you know what? If the trough and the ridge are not in the right place, it ain't going to happen. And models are terrible. You'd think they would do so much better. Models are models, and there's a Mark, that the variability over time clearly is going to be much larger. So you have to build that. You have to build that into the cake that you're baking in your mind with respect to the forecast outcome. And that is, it's kind of a tough thing to do in the sense that because you're looking at a model of something showing you something specific, and you're actually attempting to come up with a counter argument that goes against it, and that's not an easy thing for a forecaster to do. But once he figures out how to do it, or she figures out how to do it, then that's where the model becomes very useful, because you know what to look for. You know when it's doing something that clearly doesn't make any sense. As I pointing out, for example, the negative NAO that's out there, and you have the model trying to take a low, what looks like a low going up toward the Great Lakes and beyond, might be in error. Elizabeth Harrison, Central New York feels warm. It was a great day. Yeah. Did you go above 10 today? Because I really saw some interesting afternoon temperatures that were up there. Single digits, barely above zero in some spots, and some of the snow. By the way, there's a couple of tools I want to. Now that I remember, hang on one second. All right, do I have the same? Let me make sure I got a different window here. So hang on, there's a couple of new tools that I found that are really kind of cool. So let me bring it up on the screen. Yeah. So for those of you who are into thunderstorms, I found this a couple of days ago, lightningmaps.org. Okay, and it shows. I wish I had remembered to use this the other day when we had the severe weather running around, because it really would have been. Oops, hang on, wasn't supposed to do that. And you actually can even look at Europe and Oceania, not lightningmaps.org, and it will tell you the number of lightning strikes that are going on. Usually it's on like a 20-minute delay, but it really showed that action off the southeast quite a bit. And Blitz or Tung, TUNG.org, supplies the lightning data. Okay, so again, it's lightningmaps.org for this. So when we get into thunderstorms again, we're going to. I got this bookmarked, or actually, I'm going to bookmark it. Definitely going to remember to bring this up. And as far as snowfall is concerned, weather.gov. Well, this is a little bit long in terms of the. I'll put the link up in the chat for you on this in a second. But this is a good map because you can see the 24-hour snowfalls here. And again, most of them from yesterday. The big amounts up east of Lake Ontario, Constableville, New York, 14 inches. Redfield, 13 inches. Which one? What is that one? That is Governor, New York, 1.5 inches. Utica got 3. Lake Placid 3. Rochester 3.8, 3.6 to the southwest of Rochester at the airport, 5.9 at Leroy, 11 in Franklinville, New York, just for laughs. And this is, by the way, updates. This updates pretty quickly. So some of the first reports here. So Leavenworth, Washington's got 4. And Spokane Valley has 3. Areas around Spokane have 2 to 3. Dover, Idaho, 3. And southeast of Dover, Idaho has 4. And to the west of Portland, we've got some numbers there, the 1, 2. But it's early in the game here as far as snow is concerned. I don't know if you've seen this. Scott Briller, who's a regular here, usually the first one on the chat board, and he's, as I said earlier, he's not here tonight. We wish him well. He's got a few family things to deal with. Mentioned to me about the fact that apparently in Australia they had a absolutely crazy weather day where it was the hottest day ever. In Australia. See if I can find anything on Google really fast here. Australia weather. There was all sorts of stuff in the news. Sydney right now is 77 and sunny. And let's see. Yeah, Australia. The nationally average temperature. Okay, 105.6. That's the average temperature according to the country's. And I'm quoting the Washington Post here. According to the country's Bureau of Meteorology, which beats the old record of 104.5 set back in 2013, but they expect that the new record may be broken both Wednesday and Thursday Eastern Time. A searing early season heat wave roasts this country. The hot air mass is so extensive that preliminary figures show that yesterday was the hottest rec day. It's highly unusual for the national temperature record to be broken, but to be broken 2 or 3 days in a row, even more so. And in fact, let me see if I can open this. Open image. So here is, take a look at this. So the areas in dark brown in the interior, 45 Celsius or higher. So 30 is 86, 35 is 94, 40 is 103. So you're talking about 112 degrees or higher in the interior area. But the areas that were above 90, which would be 33C, and in the pink, quite extensive. Now, we don't look at this very often, but it's kind of interesting because, here's the coastal areas. Temperatures made it up into the middle and upper 70s. Now, remember, it's their equivalent of June. So, our equivalent of June. So, I would suspect if we looked at Pacific Ocean water temperatures here on the east coast of Australia, they're probably not that high. So that's keeping the coastal areas a bit more reasonable, mostly in the region of middle and upper 70s, up and down the coast. So everybody could be flocking to the beaches and really enjoying some nice weather there. So you can see, by the way, this map is courtesy of the Australian Government Bureau of Meteorology. This was stuff that not too many years ago you really didn't have access to. Certainly not the frequency. You might have heard about this in some stray news report, but that would have been the extent of it. It's wonderful how we can just access this, real-time information, which not too many years ago just was not there for us. So. You will notice, by the way, that I'm a lot more coherent tonight than I was the other night, 2 nights ago. Usually after storms, I get to where I have a real tough time completing sentences and grasping for words. And that is usually my sign that one needs to take a day off, and that's why I took off there. Timothy Veltman, Dr. Ryan Mao has been tweeting about the Australian heat wave recently. I recommend giving him a follow. I do follow him. I do follow Ryan and others. There's also something going on. One of the things I don't like about the way certain experts are treated on social media. I'm not talking about myself because I really don't. I could care less what people, what people say, when they post attacks on me. Thankfully, I don't get a lot of them, so that's good. I like that. But I see people that are fair, really reputable people that lend their time to post things, and someone who has absolutely no background in weather at all will then attack that expert, and when I see that sort of stuff, it makes you want to say, why am I doing this? Why do you bother? But that's kind of the nature of the social media world we live in. Everyone is an expert. Everyone is a doctor. Everyone is a lawyer. Everyone knows about every other subject that they're not expert in. I just find it astounding. I'm without saying it, saying exactly what is spurring all of this from my mind, but there's somebody I know somebody that I follow who I think does very good work. He does work in an area that I don't really have a good grasp of. I've learned quite a bit from this person, and because their analysis didn't come out, their prediction, may not have come out so far the way they would have liked. There are some people that are attacking that person, and I just it's such a turn off. Just stop it. Just stop it. Okay, the people that are out there doing that, you're acting like 5-year-olds. You're throwing temper tantrums because you're not getting, the kind of weather that your little, the weenies want, essentially. And I raised 5-year-olds. Okay, so I'm done with that. So I don't. I know how they behave. So it's not attractive to see an adult behave that way. Let's see. Just checking out here on the chat. Elizabeth Harrison, 11 in Syracuse right now, but it feels warm. Well, you bring up a conversation that I was having with a friend of mine today, and it's quite true. If you have when you live in cold conditions, if you have if it's 10 degrees every single day for a matter of a couple of weeks, you get used to that very quickly. So the minute it jumps to 20, it does feel warm. Where you wind up experiencing the cold is when you get these big ups and downs, where your body doesn't have time to, needs a period of time to kind of acclimate to the colder weather conditions. So when you have volatility in the day-to-day weather, your body doesn't get used to it. But once you get used to it, yeah, it's okay. Just think about long cold stretches that we've had where temperatures have been in the teens and single digits for days at a time, and it suddenly jumps up to 30, and you're like, especially if there's no wind, you want to lose the jacket. It makes because your body does get used to it. Oh, Bill, you got the cold now? Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't give it to you. I mean, I saw you it was like 3 weeks ago when I came out to the bowling alley to see you. I got this while I was down in Atlanta last week. One of the things that they have in all in the houses, a lot of the housing there in Atlanta in terms of heat, and this goes back to when I lived in New Orleans, the same thing. It's forced hot air for heat, and forced hot air for me is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It makes things super dry. And plus the fact that I don't like to sleep in a hot room. I actually keep my thermostat at 60 at night. I like to sleep with a lot of blankets and a big heavy comforter. When I have that, I sleep the whole night, uninterrupted, deep sleep, wake up the next day feeling good. But the minute the hot air, a forced hot air, and the heat comes up, we've got I got a problem. And down south, all of the housing, that's all they have. Across the south is forced hot air, and it's just not good. So I finally got where I was at my daughter's house. I actually closed the vents, this is where I got my cold. So it's between that and being around a 19-month-old. That does it for you. 60 in the winter feels warm, says Chuck Cardillo. It certainly does. Absolutely agree with you. During the summer, you're free. Yeah, it's just your body is whatever you get used to. Your thermostat, Elizabeth, is at 60 all the time. Yeah, I keep it at low 60s during the day, and at night it's at 61, 60. And I rarely get sick at home. I haven't. This is the first cold that I've had in, I think, well over 3 years. I don't even remember the last time I had one. And this is actually this is the 8th day, and I've actually felt pretty good overall for the last couple of days. It's just been kind of lingering up here, okay? And I don't have a sinus infection because everything is clear. Not to be too descriptive, but I just probably need another day or two, and I should be okay. So you got a much more coherent me tonight, all right? So thanks for being here. Mark Gladfelter, stratospheric warming. I haven't really checked. I've been reading about some people talking about the stratospheric warming. There have been a number of, it looks like some what I could describe, I guess, as warm air attacks up at that level. But we've had various runs of the GFS showing a very tight polar vortex, which would mean milder temperatures coming up for January. The operational GFS has been showing that. The ensembles, on the other hand, are showing something entirely different. It's this real odd back and forth that's been going on for a good week and a half, 2 weeks now. We'll see how it gets resolved. I don't know whose favor it's going to be resolved in. Snow lovers tend to be pessimistic, so they already have the ridge in the east. I'm sorry, the ridge in the east. Yeah, they already have the ridge in the east trough and the west dream coming true. But we'll see. So have a great night, and tomorrow is Friday, so we'll probably do some kind of live stream tomorrow night. We're back to normal this weekend because I'm not traveling, so that means the Coffee with Cioffi show on Sunday will be at its usual time. We haven't been sticking to usual time the last few weeks because of my travel issues, but we'll be at its usual time. A heads up for next week. With Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and everything else, we're going to just kind of keep things, we'll keep things open as far as what we will or won't be doing. I would say if I do something Christmas Eve, I would probably do it very early in the day, maybe a Coffee with Cioffi on Christmas Eve morning. And as far as Christmas Day goes, we'll maybe do something at night. But on the other hand, if the weather doesn't look like especially exciting, we may just take a break, complete break. But I may just jump on just to say Merry Christmas to everybody. Also, we have Hanukkah on the 20th, I believe. So happy Hanukkah to those of you, to my Jewish friends on my YouTube channel, and to those that are watching that may not be on the chat. A good and joyous Hanukkah to you, and then we go to Christmas, then we go toward New Year, and then it's to the long period of January and February. All right, so watch for website posts. Be sure you got the free app downloaded, and that's it. So have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.